Good morning. It is a good morning to be able to see everybody out and about today. If you missed any part of our gospel meeting last week, the best I can say is, well, you missed it. Now, I don't mean that in a sarcastic kind of way. I mean you really missed something. But the good news is that you are able to watch those on our YouTube or Facebook page, public page, and you can catch up. There were some really, really good lessons that were given last week. As we think about this morning's lesson in James chapter 3, I have to ask you a question. How were you taught to speak? Now, what I mean by that, I'm not talking about somebody looking at you going, Mama. That's not what I'm talking about. Or somebody going, Dad, Dad. That's not it. What I'm talking about is when you started stringing those words together, when they were teaching you how to communicate, did they teach you to do it with manners? Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Please. Thank you. You're welcome. Did they teach you to say it in such a way that it gives a cordiality? It was honest, but it was nice and it was pleasant. Did they teach you to choose your words carefully? Choose your words carefully as not to be misunderstood. Even today, the way I pronounce words, there are times that I have to ask somebody who's talking to me, what did you say? Because I heard one thing, and they said something different. I said, so what was it you were trying to let me know? What was it you were telling me? Did I hear you correctly? And a lot of times they'll say, like, what do you think I said? That's not important. Just tell me what you said. I just want to make sure I understand what's being said. But there's something that happens, and I don't know exactly where it begins to happen or what time of life it begins to happen. But as we get older, sometimes the things we're taught we kind of put by the wayside. I've made the comment many times, and when we're talking about our children, we might say something like this, it's not fit for children to say. Well, if it's not fit for children to say, who do we think we should be saying it? I mean, that's a good question. What changed? Just because we got older, it's okay to say something? No, it's still not okay to say certain things. And so it's important for us to think about that. What changed? Well, maybe we had more experiences. And when you look in Luke chapter 6 and verse 45, Jesus says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. What we have filled ourselves up with is what comes out. Jesus said it again this way in Mark chapter 7, verses 20 through 23, when talking about, in reference to traditions, he says, it's not the eating of unwashed hands, but it's what comes out of the mouth. That defiles the man because it comes from the heart, see. And that's where lies and murders come from. See, maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's through our experiences, something has been attached to our heart, so we feel like we can say things and do things that as a child, Mom and Dad would be displeased. And Grandma may be very displeased. And I dare say, how many times has you heard somebody say something, and I've been known to do this. Have you sat at your grandmama's table and said that? And then they look at you weird when you do things like that. Why should we behave this way? And so what James does here in James chapter 3 is he paints a picture. He paints a picture about a little member called the tongue. See, as we turn here, it's important to know that James is writing to people who are not getting along. He's writing to a congregation of people who are not getting along. There are those who seem that they have possessions. There are those who don't have possessions, and they're at odds with one another. They're brethren, but they're at odds with one another. And the words that they're choosing to use actually is used in, separating God's people. And so this morning, what I want us to do for a little while is look at James's discussion on the tongue. When we turn our Bibles to James chapter 3, notice what he says in verse 1. It says, my brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Now, when we look at this, he's not saying that we're not all of us, not everybody go out and teach people about Jesus. That's not what he's saying. fact, the Great Commission is to go out and tell people the gospel. That's not what he's saying here. But what he's saying is be careful, because the words that you speak carry a stricter judgment when you claim to be somebody and you have a crowd and you're talking about biblical things. He says, well, how do you get it from there? Well, let's look down to verse 13. He says, who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show by good conduct that his works are done in meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. Now notice what he says there. Why should we not everybody be teachers in an aspect like this? Because if we have bitter envy and self-seeking, we'll use opportunities like this to get points across. He goes on to say it this way: this wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly and demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. Now, there's something that I have noticed, and maybe you've noticed it too. When people are hurting or they want their way to be expressed and feel that nobody is listening, they become very dangerous people. And I don't mean with weaponry. I mean the words that they will use may cut to the heart, but not in a good way. Because we use words sometimes to prove points, to tear down who we would see as an adversary. But notice James did not say that this wisdom is heavenly wisdom. I mean, after all, how many times have we sat down and maybe somebody told us this, and I hope we didn't say this, that I just have to say something. I just have to get back. I have to get back at them. That's not a Jesus thing. Our society teaches that. That's not heavenly wisdom. That is earthly wisdom. Do you have to cut and tear down somebody to get your point across? No. No, you do not. Do you twist scriptures to make it sound like you're right in order to prove somebody wrong? No, absolutely not. That wisdom is not from above. That's not heavenly wisdom. That's earthly wisdom. Notice what he says in verse 17. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace with those who make peace. Notice what he says. The wisdom that comes from above is pure. It means it's undefiled. It's peaceable. It's not bringing war or division. It's gentle. It's not harsh. It's willing to listen. It's willing to forgive. It's not partial and doesn't show hypocrisy. See, when we start thinking about the wisdom that comes from heaven, it's very different than the ways we get along in this world. It seeks peace, not division. And so that's the purpose of the teaching. That's the purpose of these illustrations. So let's look at the illustration. Let's get the picture that James has written down so we can understand. He says it this way in verse 3. It says, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths, that they may obey us, and we turn the whole body. Now notice, when you think about a bit, it's not very big. I mean, you can hold it in your hand. It's not big. Can you hold a horse in your hand? One you plan to turn around with that little bit? No, these are 1,000-pound animals. How can you turn it with that little bit? Isn't that amazing? I know it causes discomfort. It does. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever let the mouth talk and it caused you discomfort? Well, absolutely. If we're not careful, we'll just let the mouth talk and the body says, I got to stand behind the tongue or else I'll look silly. And that's probably the best way I can put that. If I say it, I got to stand up to it because I've already said it. It's already in the air. In essence, if we're not careful, it forces us to go a particular way. Notice what it says. It says, look also at ships, although they are so large and driven by fierce winds. They are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires, and the idea with the very small rudder is in comparison. I mean, if you sit and think about this idea, if you just took a boat out of water, and you look at the little piece that guides it, it is very, very small compared to the whole big boat. But why can it make it go? Because it cuts the water the way it wants to go. It makes the channel, so it will go exactly where you want it. Of course, as long as there's enough power behind it to make it go that way. Even the biggest ships don't have humongous rudders. And so when we start thinking about this again, you say, okay, the words that we use sometimes will cut the path that we'll try to walk. And we'll try to be that person, that individual will hold up to a standard, even though we know it would be wrong. Because the path is already there. We feel like we have to go through it. I mean, just think about those two ideas. Notice, when you go back to verse 2, notice when he says, if anyone does not stumble on the word, he is a perfect man. What does he say? He says, we're going to make mistakes. And if we're not, we're a very mature individual, able to bridle the whole body also. Now, that's something really to think about. Something really to think about. Notice, we'll skip on down to verse 8 real quick. We'll pick up 5 through 7 in just a moment. Notice what verse 8 says. Verse 8 says, but no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. You say, what does that mean? It doesn't mean you can't help it. That's what it doesn't mean. I've heard it said that. But you have to focus on the idea with tame. What does it mean to tame an animal? My good friend had a service dog. In fact, her face is on the license plates of my cars. Her name is Bella. And that is the most impressive dog I have ever seen. Well, when she was living. And this is why. If she didn't have her harness on, she was a normal dog. I mean normal. She'd run. She would play. I've seen her snatch pizza out of little kids' hands and walk off. She was a normal dog. She wouldn't stay in the yard. But the very second the harness went on, she would sleep behind the back pew and you'd never know she was in the building. Brad could throw something anywhere. She'd just go pick it up. I want you to stand here. And he had commands right and left, and that's where she would go. Had command if he wanted her to walk around the back to get to the other side. If he wanted her to stand in the front. If they pulled the handle up on the harness, she was very watchful. But the very second you take the harness off, she was gone. Normal dog. Until you put the harness on. She was tame. If she needed to go get it, she'd go get it. She could open any door in their house by touching a pad. But yet, she never ran away from the house. Our tongue isn't like that. Our tongue isn't like that. We can sit down and say, self, you shouldn't say that. And if we ain't careful, what are we saying? Exactly what we told self not to say. In fact, we may even forget we're not supposed to say it. If we let our mouth just run, it will run. And it'll carry us further than we ever need to go. It's not saying you can't control what you say. It says you can't trust it always to say what you need it to say. It's like this. Have you ever said something and you wish you could just grab it? But it's gone. We go back, notice what it says in verse 5. Even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among the members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. When we look at this idea here, notice we like to say things. And saying things isn't a bad thing at all. I mean, naturally, if somebody had a grandchild, a new grandchild, we're going to be talking about it. Somebody's going to announce how long it was and how much it weighed and when it was born and where you can put the gifts at, right? I mean, that's how it works. You run into somebody like this in a line at Walmart. They got pictures. I mean, used to you would grab a wallet and you'd only have, I don't know, maybe 6 pictures. Now you have a phone and there's hundreds of pictures. You can look at grandkids all day long, and it's okay. We love grandkids. We like to talk about self, but sometimes self gets in the way. And we build up how big our self is, and we get ourselves in trouble. Not long ago, there's a humongous forest fire in the Smokies. You remember that? You say, well, what started it? A humongous bonfire? No. A big old house fire? No. Did a propane tank blow up? No. There were some kids that decided over on the hill in North Carolina, they'd flip matches over the hill. Well, it wasn't a problem until it caught fire. And think about all the acres that were lost. All the homes and property that was gone. The homes that were destroyed. All of that. One match. Isn't that crazy? It's amazing to think about that. But in our mouths, do we not say things like that? I mean, we don't get very far from the building. If we had a good story, someone has a better story. I mean, actually, one of my favorite places to go in the world, Bass Pro, I think that's the happiest place on earth. You know what it says on the front of the store? Welcome fishermen, hunters, and all other liars. Did you ever notice that? If somebody has a story, there's a bigger one to tell. There's a bigger one to tell. I'm better, faster, stronger, better. Self-motivates every bit of that. And it can destroy even the best relationships. Even the best relationships. We said this when we were younger. Maybe you were taught this. I know I've taught my children this. Nobody likes know-it-all. Nobody likes that. If we're around them very long, how much trouble do they get into? That's a good question. Notice what he says starting in verse 9. With it we bless God and our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in a similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not be so. Does a spring send forth fresh water and bitter from the same opening? Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olives, and a grapevine bear figs? Thus no spring yields both salt water and fresh water. What is he saying? Well, let's look. He's not talking about brackish water, because I know how that works sometimes. Brackish water is where it's not really salty, but it's not fresh water. It's a little, you could kind of use it for stuff. Freshwater fish could live in it, but it doesn't go any further. We're talking about if you go up to the spring, a natural spring that comes up from the ground. Maybe somebody in the long ago has taken a pipe and drove it back up in the mountain and had this little spring come out. And you can go get, a lot of people, springs I've seen, you go get jugs of water. You just go fill it up and take it home and fill it up and take it home. And when you do that, the first jug isn't sweet and the next one, fresh water, good water. You drink it and you're like, that's great. And the next jug isn't salty. It's the same. When we think about our mouths, think about the songs we just sang. How is it we could give our mouths over into cursing people because they're too slow? Or they're in our way and we're in a hurry. Or they didn't do what I wanted them to do. They didn't behave the way I wanted them to behave. They're not doing church the way I want them to do church. I mean, think about that. You know, it's really hard when we start singing songs and when we all get to heaven when I can't stand the people I'm sitting around. I mean, let's get real with it. The tongue will destroy all of those things. When we think about our tongues, we can choose the words that come out. And so when we look at this idea, he's saying we need to be saying wholesome things, not unwholesome things. If we don't keep a check on our mouths, we will write checks we don't want to cash. What do you mean by that? They'll put us in arguments we don't want to finish. They'll put us in a relationship that we're always at odds, and we don't want to have to say the next thing. Not because it will make it better, but because it will make it worse. If we leave it unchecked, it will destroy friendships. It will destroy family. It will destroy the work that we have in spreading the gospel. You know, it's really hard to tell somebody that God loves them and show them in Scripture when you just got finished making them feel about that big. I'd say it's near impossible. And so we sit down and we say, well, what can we take from this? Because when we put it all together, normally, from 3 to 12, it's just normal everyday conversation. And so in natural everyday conversation, we need to be careful what we say to people. We need to be mindful of our words. We need to be mindful of how we address people. But when we look at this in context even, we got to be mindful of how we use opportunities to say something about Jesus. We need to make sure that we're saying the right things and we're not saying things so we get our way. So you go back to 1 Corinthians in chapter 1, and there's a discussion in the first chapter where Paul says, some of you say that I'm of Paul and of Cephas and of Apollos and of Christ. And he asked these questions. Were you baptized in the name of Paul, or was Paul crucified for you? The answer is no. But what were they doing? They were saying, I follow this preacher, I follow that preacher, I follow this preacher, and I don't follow any preachers. I just follow Jesus. I mean, that's essentially, if you want to break it down, that's what it looks like. We don't use opportunities to speak for Jesus to belittle others or just to get our way. We use opportunities to speak about Jesus, whether from a pulpit like this or from the comfort of our own phone. That's generally how we talk about Jesus, right? The comfort of our own phone. That we honor him with our words. And we're not what we would call blessing them, but we're truly blessing them. We're being helpful. And just because we can say it doesn't mean we have to. Just because we can say it doesn't necessarily mean we have to, even in times of weakness. And it's very important we understand that idea. That just because somebody has done something doesn't mean that it gives us the right to say something back. After all, if we think about it, what all could Jesus say to us? Aren't you glad he just says, I love you? And he doesn't hold those things against us? See, isn't that amazing? If you want to think about it this way, the tongue is a mirror of the heart. Whatever's on the inside comes out. And if we fill ourselves up with it long enough, that's exactly what comes out of our mouth. So what do we need to fill ourselves up with? It's Colossians 3:16, where it says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom. When you start thinking about that idea, what does he want you to do? Sing to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. That's where it starts. That's where it starts. It starts with the heart. You know, this morning I was thinking about our lives. What is your life like? What is your life like? See, that's something that we have to individually answer. I don't know the answer to the people's lives in here. Not all of them. I know what my life looks like. But you know what your life looks like. Is it one that honors God in our words and our deeds, in the things that we do and the things that we choose not to do? Or is it one that doesn't? Today, if you've put Christ on in baptism a long time ago and wandered astray, why not repent, pray, and come back? Or maybe you've not yet put Christ on a baptism, but you know you need to. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ, you're willing to tell this wonderful crowd that He's the Christ. You're willing to repent of your past sins, means turn your back on Him, turn away from Him. Live a different life. Put Him on in baptism, have those sins washed away, and live a life that honors God. Or maybe you have a need today outside of salvation. Let it be known as we sing this song of encouragement.